A perimeter doesn't start with walls, traps, or tools. It starts with the moment someone you've never seen decides to measure you. That is the part most survivors miss. In a post-collapse world, strangers don't announce themselves by shouting or approaching your gate. They study you from the tree line. They time your movements. They test the edges of your territory with small noises, thrown rocks, or slow circling routes. Your real danger begins long before you ever hear a footstep. And if you don't detect their curiosity early, you won't survive their intent later. This is where old world assumptions collapse. Cameras die when the grid dies. Motion sensors turn useless when batteries run dry. Even a solid fence becomes nothing more than a loud suggestion. What people used to call security systems depended entirely on power, stability, and predictable behavior. Three things the new world no longer contains. That's why myths persist. People cling to gear instead of understanding the physics and human instincts that actually shape movement in the dark. They wait for threats to reveal themselves, not realizing that in this era, the quiet ones are the problem. So, the standard must change. You are not trying to protect a home. You are trying to prevent reconnaissance. You need tools that work when power doesn't, when nights are long, and when you are outnumbered. Tools made from scrap wire, broken metal, gravel, glass, and wood. Because after collapse, those are the only materials guaranteed to exist. Here is the blueprint. 7 DIY perimeter defense devices designed for one purpose: to expose anyone approaching your base before they're close enough to matter. No electricity, no guesswork, just physics, terrain, and the certainty that detection buys time, and time buys survival. The first device you build after collapse must solve the simplest and most dangerous problem. You never hear the intruder until it's too late. A tension line trip network fixes that by turning the terrain itself into an alarm system that doesn't sleep, doesn't break, and doesn't need power. It's nothing more than scavenged wire, scrap anchors, and a resonant trigger. But in a silent world, that tiny sound becomes the difference between preparing for a threat and waking up with one standing over you. In a post-collapse landscape, intruders don't walk straight toward you. They skirt tree lines, hug debris piles, crawl low, or move through brush to avoid being seen. That's why the tension line must live in the places people choose when they're trying to avoid notice. Under knee height, behind logs, inside narrow bypasses where a human body naturally shifts its weight. These aren't random placements. They're predictions. You're not guarding your land, you're catching the path their instincts will choose. The build is simple by necessity. Strip a length of wire from abandoned vehicles, broken appliances, or old fences. Run it low across a forced path, ideally where visibility is poor or footing is uneven, because that's where a cautious intruder steps most deliberately. Anchor the line using bent nails, roots, or metal stakes scavenged from rubble. At the far end, attach a trigger, a metal shard suspended from a string, a thin sheet that vibrates, or a tin can with pebbles inside. You're not aiming for volume. You're aiming for a clear, unnatural signature, a sharp tick, a quick rattle, a tension snap that your ear immediately recognizes. That tiny sound tells you three things instantly: direction, distance, and intent. Direction from the echo, distance from the delay, intent from how the intruder reacts. A wildlife brush-by produces a soft, continuous rustle. A human produces a distinct stop, a shift, a pause in breath, and that silence is louder than any alarm. The real power of this device is psychological. Once the line triggers, the intruder knows they've made a mistake, but they don't know what you now know. They freeze, unsure whether they were heard. Their internal map collapses. Their caution turns into hesitation, and hesitation is predictable. You gain control without confrontation. In post-collapse defense, the first victory is not stopping someone. It's forcing them to reveal themselves before they reach you. Silence is never truly silent after the collapse. It's dense, heavy, and deceptive. Human footsteps blend into wind, brush, shifting rubble. That's why the second device isn't meant to make more noise. It's meant to pull noise toward you, amplify it, and separate human movement from the background environment. The low-tech sound funnel exists because your ears alone are not enough. In the dark, at distance, or when exhaustion dulls your senses, you need terrain that listens on your behalf. A sound funnel is built from scavenged metal objects, dented cans, broken ducting, hollow pipes, bent sheets from wrecked cars, or even the aluminum frame of a shattered awning. Anything that can vibrate, resonate, or channel sound becomes a sensor. After collapse, metal is everywhere. Construction ruins, roadside debris, abandoned workshops. What was once trash becomes your early warning network. The principle is brutally simple. Human footsteps create micro-vibrations in the ground. Brush movement produces erratic rustles. When these vibrations hit a hollow metal structure, they become identifiable, directional, and louder than they should be. You're not amplifying the world, you're extracting the parts of it that matter. To build it, find a narrow corridor of approach, a trench line, a drainage ditch, the space between collapsed walls, or the natural funnel formed by dense vegetation. Intruders instinctively move through terrain like this because it offers cover from open sightlines. Place your funnel system along that invisible pressure route. Drive metal stakes into the ground and attach cans or hollow tubes at angles pointing back toward your base. The opening must face outward, toward where an intruder's weight will disturb the earth or brush. When they move, the metal resonates, a faint buzz, a hollow thump, a metallic tremor that cuts through the night in a way soil never does. Layer multiple funnels along a curve. Sound travels differently along each shape. One might hum, another might snap, another might ring with a dry metallic echo. Soon, you'll learn to read them the way sailors read wind hitting rigging, each tone a specific warning. And unlike digital sensors, these devices cannot be hacked, drained, or manipulated without making even more noise. This tool excels when you're asleep, tired, overwhelmed, or alone. It extends your hearing far beyond its natural range, turning rustle into warning and footstep into certainty. In a world where danger moves quietly, you need something that forces silence to betray its secrets. The sound funnel doesn't just help you hear intruders, it helps you hear them before they realize they've been heard. Night changes the psychology of every intruder. Darkness narrows their vision, heightens their caution, and forces them to rely on silhouettes more than details. That's exactly why the shadow decoy trap exists. Not to injure, not to alarm, but to control what the intruder thinks they're seeing. In a post-collapse world, the mind becomes the most fragile component in any assault, and shadows are the simplest way to break it. A shadow decoy is built from the most common debris found after societal collapse. Broken window frames, shards of reflective metal, cracked mirrors, bent solar panels, or any surface that can distort and redirect light. Even moonlight, starlight, or the faint glow of a distant fire is enough to bring the trap alive. You're not creating new light, you're bending the existing light into a shape that suggests presence. The concept is simple. Humans rely on pattern recognition. When darkness limits detail, the brain fills in the blanks. a silhouette that vaguely resembles a person standing watch, a shifting glint that looks like someone moving, a distorted shadow near a corner. Each forces the intruder to assume they're seen, tracked, or outnumbered. That assumption slows them, reroutes them, or pushes them into parts of the perimeter you want them to enter. Building the trap is straightforward. Find a vantage point near your outer perimeter where moonlight or ambient sky glow regularly hits. Plant a broken panel or angled metal sheet in a position that reflects or projects a humanoid outline onto a wall, tree, or structure. The shape doesn't need detail. It only needs posture. The illusion of someone standing, leaning, or shifting weight. Add a slight hanging element, such as loose wire or a fragment of cloth, so the wind introduces movement. A shadow that twitches is far more psychologically disruptive than a static one. Place multiple decoys in layered depth. The first creates doubt, the second creates confusion, the third confirms to the intruder that they are not alone. A cautious scout will hesitate, believing they've been detected. A desperate one will detour into ground you've already prepared, gravel beds, tension lines, or funnels. Even experienced raiders cannot ignore the primal reflex triggered by seeing a figure in the dark. The true strength of this device is that it shifts the burden of decision-making onto the intruder. They must guess what is real. You already know the truth. And in a world where every mistake has consequences, hesitation becomes an asset you can exploit. A shadow decoy trap doesn't just protect your perimeter, it convinces the enemy your perimeter is watching them, even when you aren't. Some devices defend your base by revealing the intruder. The Crunch Zone gravel bed defends it by removing their ability to move silently. In a post-collapse world where nights stretch long and sound travels farther than light, the ground beneath someone's feet becomes a weapon, if you choose the right terrain and force them to step on it. That is the purpose of this device, a surface that betrays every footfall regardless of skill, weight, or footwear. After collapse, debris is everywhere. Roads cracked open, construction sites abandoned, rail yards stripped bare. From all of this, one resource is abundant, overlooked, and priceless. Dry, jagged gravel. Not smooth river stones. Those can roll silently. You want broken concrete chips, brick fragments, crushed masonry, and angular rubble. These surfaces don't compress quietly. They grind. They snap. They scrape. Even a careful intruder must put weight somewhere, and the moment they do, the gravel speaks for them. To build the bed, choose the approach path intruders will favor. Not the obvious straight route, but the one with natural cover. Behind a collapsed shed, near a tree line, beside a ruined wall. People instinctively choose paths where they feel unseen. That's where you lay your surface. Clear existing vegetation, level the earth, and spread a dense layer of jagged gravel 3 to 4 centimeters thick. Thin layers won't work. They allow partial silent steps. Thick layers create unavoidable noise as rocks shift underfoot. What makes this device invaluable is its consistency. The sound signature is always recognizable. A gritty crush followed by a micro slide. Animals produce uneven, chaotic noise patterns. Humans produce weight-bearing, rhythm-based impacts. Once you've trained your ear, you'll know the difference instantly, even half asleep, even in total dark. To enhance the effect, border the gravel bed with materials that amplify vibration. Hollow metal pipes, an old metal door laid flat nearby, or a rusted water tank acting as a passive resonator. When gravel shifts, these structures carry the sound farther, giving you more reaction time. Nothing electronic, nothing delicate, just physics doing the work. The psychological value is just as important. Intruders who expect silence panic when their own steps betray them. They freeze, lift their weight, try again, only to make more noise. That hesitation cascades into uncertainty, and uncertainty pushes them into predictable choices, retreating, slowing, or redirecting into parts of your perimeter you've already prepared. The crunch zone bed isn't a trap. It's a guarantee that no one approaches you quietly ever again. Most survivors think of perimeter defense as adding obstacles. In reality, one of the strongest tools you have after the collapse is removing what others rely on: cover. Vegetation, debris piles, abandoned structures. All of these create blind spots where an intruder can pause, hide, study your movements, or prepare for entry. If you don't shape the terrain shapes the threat. That's where the vegetation, kill slot, and open corridor come in. A controlled strip of land engineered to force any intruder into exposure. In post-collapse environments, plant overgrowth becomes fast and aggressive. Vines reclaim fences. Tall grass swallows paths. Bushes become natural blinds. Raiders, scouts, or desperate wanderers instinctively use these as concealment, advancing slowly, crouched low, waiting for the moment you look away. Your objective is to deny them that option entirely. Not everywhere, just where it matters. Start by identifying the inevitable approach vectors, the routes that make the most sense for a cautious intruder. Slight elevation slopes, tree lines, walls that offer shadows, or terrain that hides movement until the last second. These are not possible routes. They are probable ones. That is where you carve your kill slot. A cleared channel carved through vegetation and debris, wide enough that anyone entering it becomes fully visible from your watch point. The clearing must look natural but feel uncomfortable to cross. Remove waist-high plants, cut down brush, pull fallen branches, and drag aside debris. Do not clear too much. You're not landscaping. You're engineering psychological pressure. Intruders step into the open only when there is no other choice. Your job is to make sure there is no other choice. To reinforce the effect, keep the ground surface simple and readable. Dry soil, packed dirt, or sparse gravel. Every footstep in this open corridor becomes easy to spot, easy to hear, and easy to track. Meanwhile, your vantage point should overlook this slot from partial cover, behind a broken wall, within a collapsed doorway, or from an angle that lets you observe without silhouette exposure. In post-collapse defense, information is the real weapon, and this corridor feeds you information constantly. The psychological weight of a kill slot is immense. Humans hate crossing exposed ground, especially at night. When they realize the terrain leaves them no alternative, they slow down, hesitate, check angles, and by doing so, they reveal their level of training and intent. A desperate scavenger moves differently from an organized scout. A lone wanderer behaves differently from a coordinated group. Before they even reach your inner perimeter, the corridor tells you who they are. This device doesn't stop intruders. It forces them to show themselves long before they reach you. And in collapse conditions, visibility is victory. In a world without power, without night vision, without thermal optics, darkness becomes the great equalizer and the great vulnerability. You can hear movement, you can sense direction, but you cannot reliably see a human body until they are dangerously close. That's why the passive thermal trip reflector exists, a device that turns the intruder's own body heat into a visible signal using nothing more than scavenged metal, glass fragments, and natural temperature contrast. You're not trying to illuminate them. You're forcing their heat to betray them. Thermal contrast is simple physics. At night, most surfaces cool rapidly. Scrap metal, concrete, vehicle panels, wall fragments, rusted doors, roof sheets. They drop to ambient temperature, becoming cold plates in the dark. A human body, even at rest, radiates warmth. When that warmth passes near or reflects off a cooler surface, it creates a distortion, a shimmer, a blurred outline, a faint glow under moonlight, or a visible edge where heat meets cold. You don't need high-tech goggles to read this. Your eyes can detect temperature contrast as movement, even if you don't consciously understand why. To build the device, collect reflective or semi-reflective materials. The chrome of a broken car bumper, a bent aluminum panel, the mirror of a shattered bathroom cabinet, the metallic back of an old appliance, even polished scraps of corrugated sheet. Plant these pieces at angles facing the likely approach routes, especially near choke points you can't monitor directly. The key is placement. They should not be obvious. They should sit low, half buried, partially concealed by rubble or grass. When positioned correctly, they catch moonlight or ambient sky glow, but stay dull enough not to attract attention. When a warm body moves past them, two things happen. First, the heat creates a brief distortion in the reflection, a wobble or ghost silhouette that your eye picks up instantly. Second, the surface itself can fog slightly or gather microcondensation from the temperature shift, creating a momentary darkening or smudge. These changes are subtle but unmistakable once you train your awareness. In darkness, where everything else is static, even a tiny thermal ripple becomes a warning. You can enhance the effect by placing these reflectors near materials that retain cold longer: stone slabs, vehicle doors, metal barrels. A warm figure passing between two cold masses creates a high-contrast window, a move-in void against a stable frame. You are essentially building a natural thermal tripwire with no electricity, no maintenance, and no detectable signature. What makes this device so valuable is that it works when you're exhausted, half asleep, or mentally fogged. Humans are wired to detect anomalies: a flicker in a dull surface, a soft distortion, a flash of movement where nothing should move. Even at 20 meters, even under starlight, you will sense it before you consciously interpret it. The intruder, meanwhile, has no idea their heat just exposed them. In collapse conditions where vision is unreliable and stealth defines survival, the passive thermal reflector gives you something priceless: the ability to see the unseen, using the intruder's own body as the signal. Not every defensive device needs to stop an intruder outright. Sometimes all you need is 1 second, a stumble, a loss of balance, a shift in momentum to change the outcome of an encounter. The mechanical momentum redirector is built for that exact moment. It turns human movement into vulnerability using nothing more than scavenged wood, pivoting scrap metal, loose hinges, and gravity. In a world where you can't rely on high-tech traps or lethal mechanisms, this device gives you the simplest advantage: control over how an intruder moves. Humans, especially at night, rely heavily on predictable footing. They expect surfaces to be stable, weight-bearing, and still. When that assumption breaks, so does their rhythm. Even a subtle redirection, a sliding board, a tilting plank, or a hinged barrier, forces their body to compensate instantly. That compensation creates noise, hesitation, and exposure. You're not trying to injure them. You're trying to interrupt the one thing every intruder needs: steady momentum. To build this tool, start by locating a narrow passage an intruder is likely to take. Gaps between collapsed walls, broken doorways, abandoned hallways, or sections of fencing that funnel movement. These bottlenecks naturally slow people down and force single-file movement, making them perfect for mechanical redirection. Next, scavenge what the collapse has left behind. Loose door panels, fallen shutters, cracked wooden planks, hollow metal frames. Hinges are everywhere. Discarded cabinets, vehicle hoods, toolboxes. Even improvised pivot points made from rebar and wire can work. Install a panel so it appears stable but tilts slightly when stepped on or brushed against. This shift doesn't need to be dramatic. A 3 to 5 degree tilt is enough to alter balance without causing a fall. Another variation uses a low swinging arm made from a strip of wood or metal suspended on a simple pivot. When an intruder moves through the bottleneck, the arm gently bumps their leg or hip, redirecting their weight and forcing them to catch themselves. That momentary recovery produces noise, gravel crunch, fabric scrape, breath intake, and reveals their exact location. If you want an even subtler effect, place a loose board over uneven ground, so it rocks under pressure. Humans instinctively react to unstable footing by shifting weight to regain balance. That reaction pattern is unmistakable and loud in the quiet darkness of a collapsed world. The psychological impact is immediate. When footing becomes unreliable, intruders slow down, raise their center of gravity, and start probing ahead with their hands or feet, making them far easier to detect. A confident scout becomes a cautious crawler. A bold approach becomes a hesitant shuffle. You haven't harmed them, but you've stripped them of initiative. The momentum redirector doesn't block their path. It takes their movement, their greatest advantage, and turns it into your warning. A perimeter is never a single device. It is a sequence, a chain of small failures the intruder experiences without understanding why. That is the purpose of layering. You're not trying to stop them with one tool. You're shaping their entire approach from the moment they step into your influence to the moment they realize they've been read. In a post-collapse world where you lack cameras, drones, sensors, and manpower, layering becomes the only way to create a defense system that behaves like it's alive. Your outer layer is built from distance-based detection, the tension line trip network, and the sound funnels. These tools don't just alert you. They mark the intruder's initial entry point. They tell you how cautious they are, how heavy they move, how often they pause. This is the information gathering phase, where you learn their intent long before they come close. The mid-layer shapes their behavior. The shadow decoy traps and crunch zone gravel beds manipulate what they see, what they fear, and where they step. A silhouette in the dark forces hesitation. Gravel underfoot forces noise. Together, these tools push the intruder into predictable routes exactly where you want them. The inner layer is the exposure zone, the vegetation kill slot, and the thermal reflectors. Here, they are visible even when they believe they aren't. Their heat, their outline, their hesitation, all of it becomes readable. By the time they enter this corridor, they're not a threat approaching your base. They're a subject you're observing under controlled conditions. And if they push deeper still, the momentum redirector steals their confidence. Their movement becomes unstable. They're breathing louder, their decision-making slower. They are no longer advancing. They are surviving their own mistakes. Layering does not stop intruders. Layering ensures you are never surprised by them. And in collapse conditions, that is the difference between being ready and being overrun. In the post-collapse world, survival isn't awarded to the strongest or the most armed. It belongs to the least visible. Every device you've built, every layer you've shaped, has one purpose: not to scare intruders away, not to overwhelm them with force, but to ensure they never truly understand you. Uncertainty is your armor. Ambiguity is your advantage. A perimeter that reveals nothing while learning everything is the closest thing to power you can possess when society no longer provides it. Most people imagine defense as confrontation. In reality, confrontation is failure. By the time someone reaches your doorstep, too many variables are already out of your control. But when your perimeter quietly records their presence, manipulates their movement, steals their silence, exposes their outline, and disrupts their rhythm, the fight ends before it begins. You decide when to watch, when to prepare, when to withdraw, or when to make yourself known. Control is survival, not violence. These devices aren't about being clever. They're about accepting the truth of the new world. You cannot afford to be reactive. You cannot rely on luck or instincts. You must build systems that work even when you are exhausted, hungry, distracted, or asleep. Systems that compensate for your weaknesses and exploit the intruder's assumptions. Systems that turn the landscape itself into your ally. Because in the end, survival after collapse isn't about defending a base. It's about defending certainty. The certainty that nothing reaches you unseen, unheard, or unexplained. That certainty is what keeps you alive when everything else has already fallen.